everyone. Welcome back to session 2 of the Positive Psychology presentation. Today we are going to be talking about positive emotions. So in this session, we are going to explore the work of Barbara Fredrickson, and the majority of the information comes from her book Positivity, but she has written several articles that are also worth exploring. So what are we going to be doing today? Today we are going to understand the role that positive emotions play in our well-being. We also will be introduced to the broaden and build theory of positive psychology presented in Barbara Fredrickson's work. And also we will look at the positivity ratio and how to measure your own positivity ratio. As I mentioned, that we are going to be looking at Barbara Fredrickson's work, and that's why her link to the research page is going to be available to review a lot of those different things. So what do we know about positive emotions? In this session, we're going to learn about Barbara Fredrickson's work. And we are going to look at some of the top emotions that have been studied. Can you think of a few examples of positive emotions? Just take a moment to think about what comes to mind. So do you think of joy maybe as a positive emotion? Gratitude is a positive emotion. Serenity is also a positive emotion. Interest, hope, pride, awe, amusement, inspiration, and love. So those are 10 positive emotions. I'll just repeat them just so you have another idea of what those positive emotions are. Joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, awe, amusement, inspiration, and love. So what we're going to be talking about over the next several minutes is thinking about building and broadening our experiences with those emotions. So those emotions might not be things that you think about on a regular basis, but after today's lecture, hopefully you'll be focused more on building those positive emotions. Fredrickson has a theory called broaden and build. It teaches us about two core truths about positive emotions. One is that positivity opens us. Positive emotions open our hearts and our minds, making us more receptive and more creative. And who doesn't want that, right? If we're students, if we're in the workplace, all of us want to be more creative and more receptive. Also, positivity transforms us for the better. By opening our hearts and minds, positive emotions allow us to discover and build new skills, new ties, new knowledge, and new ways of being. So as students, you're constantly influenced by new things and new behavior. In the workplace, you may be constantly exposed to new software, new forms of communication, new policies, and this really allows us, being positive and having these positive emotions really allows us to dive into those new things. So some of the science that's involved in this is the broaden test. So Fredrickson tested subjects' peripheral vision, and it was where they were focusing their attention when primed with positive images. What she actually found in this vision test is that it expanded individuals' field of vision when they looked at positive images, and this expanded their ability to take in information, which is pretty impressive when you think about that. So positive images literally broadened these participants' field of view. And that's why it's called the broaden and build theory. So I want to actually give another example of how positive emotions influence us and is influenced by the science. So this is a local versus global setting. So I'm just going to show an image on the screen. So looking at this image, this is a classic example of focusing on details versus focusing on the big picture. So I want you to think about which of the bottom two is most like the top picture. So just think about that for a moment. Which one do you think is most like the top picture? So what the research says is those who are experiencing positive emotions are more likely to actually choose the one on the left. Now, what researchers think about that is because you're focusing on the top one, there's squares that are building the formation. And so therefore, when you focus on the bigger picture, you recognize that even though the formation is not the same, it is the actual physical squares that are the same. So that helps you to make that connection of a more global thought process in the researcher's mind than a more local thought process where you're only focusing on the formation and not necessarily the global identity of the object. So that's one more example of how positivity affects how you view the world and how positive emotions view the world. Now we're going to introduce the concept of building. So as you may remember from the introduction to positive psychology, the session 1, we looked at a video that was introducing us to the happiness equation. That was the Sean Anker video. You may remember Amy the unicorn from that video, but he also had another concept that he talked about, and it's the concept of building. So he stated in his talk that the learning centers of the brain turned on when we are happy. So that's an important thing to remember. We are more receptive to new ideas, more receptive to learning when we are happy. When we experience positive emotions, we are building resiliency. And we actually get better at it the more we experience positivity. This is from Fredrickson's research. So now Fredrickson refers to these things and these resources as vantage resources, which is something that Sean Anker talked about. And this allows us to draw more from future positive experiences. So they build on each other. The more positive interactions we have, the more we notice positive things. So that is a really important thing to make note of. The next concept I'm going to talk about and introduce is the positivity ratio. So there is some controversy when discussing the positivity ratio. So there isn't a controversy about the fact that the more positive experiences you have, the more positive emotions you will experience. That's not controversial. What is controversial is the ratio. So there's oftentimes a 3-to-1 ratio that's discussed, but it actually might be 5-to-1 or 7-to-1. There's lots of different resources and references to different levels of this positivity ratio. So the idea of the ratio is that at a bare minimum, there's 3 positive interactions that are required to 1 negative to allow people to flourish. So it's kind of this tipping point of positive to negative. So that's the positivity ratio. There is an article that calls into question the mathematics behind Fredrickson's 3-to-1 ratio. And we think that, as researchers, we think that it's somewhere between 3 to 5. As I mentioned, it might be 7. But there is research out there that supports that the more positive experiences you have, that it's very important to have more positive than negative. So that we know from the information. So there is a ratio. Notice that it is a ratio. It's not 0 negative experiences. That's important to make note of. Negativity is a part of our life. And this is why focusing on positive emotions should not be confused for a philosophy that we should always experience positivity or be happy at all times with bright yellow smiley faces on. Rather, there's room for both. So I'm going to repeat this because this is very important to note. Positive psychology is not about erasing negative experiences or not allowing yourself to experience negative experiences. There is a reason why that we need to pay attention to these negative experiences. However, positive psychology makes room for the positive. It makes room for those positive experiences, and that it deserves to be noted when we're having those positive experiences. So in the next session, we'll discuss the negativity bias and why we need more positive experiences and more positive emotions to flourish. But I want to make note of that this does not discount any negativity that you're experiencing. However, like we talked about in the first lecture, this is about mental wellness and mental well-being. So it's important to note the positives as well. So another separation and distinguish that I would like to make is between positive emotions and pleasure. There's a difference between this. Bodily pleasures accurately narrow our focus. They point us towards exactly what we need in that current moment, except for when it comes to addictions. Those things might be a little bit out of our control, so to speak, as far as it might be due to a mental illness. So for example, a cool bath feels good when we are overheated, but not when we're cold already. Delicious food stops tasting good after we become too full. So this is that hedonic pleasure that I mentioned in that very first session. So getting on that hedonic treadmill. So the idea with hedonic pleasure is we often need more and more and more to get the same boost. So a new big screen TV starts to look small after a few months. That new iPhone is old when the new model comes out. So it's this hedonic treadmill where we're constantly searching for the next biggest and best experience. Whereas positive emotions are something that can be very impactful, and they build on each other. They don't tear each other down. So the next logical question is, how do we get to that? How do we cultivate positivity? So in there are 10 positive emotions like we talk about. So what I want you to think about is think about each positive emotion. So for example, gratitude. Think about gratitude. This one is very important, so we are actually going to dedicate an entire session to it. But right now, just think about something that you're grateful for. Reflect on that for a moment. What influences your gratitude? What's something that you're grateful for? Think about that. Next, we'll think about the positive emotion, hope. Hope is often described as finding light in the darkness. This emotion really helps us to remind us that positivity and negativity often go hand in hand. So think about hope. Think about what that feeling is like for you. Think about that emotion. How do you cultivate that emotion? How do you experience hope? Next, we'll think about pride. So initially, my first reaction when I read that pride is a positive emotion, it took me off guard a little bit, because here I'm in Duluth, Minnesota, and I grew up in Minnesota. And in Minnesota, we don't think of this as necessarily a positive emotion. But what we're really thinking about here is the hubris of pride. Pride is about feeling good about an accomplishment. So it's not necessarily when you think of being boastful, but feeling good about the work that you're doing, having that sense of pride. So think about the last time that you experienced that. What did that look like for you? Next, we'll think about inspiration. This can also be called elevation. When somebody else's actions make you want to be a better you. So you might have a friend or a colleague or a professor that in a good way pushes you to be better, knows what you're capable of, and pushes you to achieve that greatness. When's the last time that happened to you? The next positive emotion is awe. This is sometimes confused with inspiration, but what we want to think about is noticing something that's bigger than an individual. It can be nature, it can be a deity, it can be lots of different things. So think about the last time that you experienced awe. What did that look like for you? What feelings did you have when you were experiencing that emotion of awe? The next emotion that we're going to think about and reflect on is interest. So think about the last time you lost track of time because you were so involved or interested in something. So for me, when I experience this emotion of interest, it's watching one of my nieces or nephews who's just fascinated by learning something new. So we'll get lost in our conversation or in our actions, and I'll just lose track of time because they are so interested in this new concept and this new activity that we completely lose track of time. So that's an example for me. So you might have trouble thinking of this one. That's not unusual, but I'll give you a moment to think about when's the last time you experienced interest as an emotion. Okay, now serenity. Think about the last time you experienced serenity. So this is different than the things we often think about as positivity, such as clicking your heels in joy or that bright yellow smiley face. But serenity is definitely a positive emotion and it's a powerful emotion. So think about the last time you experienced serenity. Then joy. Think about the last time you experienced joy. Maybe it was a clicking your heels in joy moment. And also love. Think about the last time you experienced the emotion of love. What did that look like for you? And lastly, amusement. Think about the last time you were amused and how that felt. What is an example of amusement? Okay, so after thinking about all those different emotions, how do you feel? What does your body feel like? Do you feel differently than before you were thinking about those emotions? If so, now you can kind of see the power of those positive emotions and the power of that positivity ratio. Did you smile quite often? Did you laugh when you were thinking of those different examples? Think about that power, having that ability to feel that every single day and what that looks like for you. So a way you can do that is by developing a mindfulness practice, really noticing those positive emotions. And this is something that definitely takes practice. It's not natural for us to hold in the good and to recognize the good, but it's definitely important to have that mindfulness. So I have in the past several times tried to develop a meditation practice, as I mentioned in the first lecture. The very first time that I tried to develop a mindfulness practice, it didn't go very well. It was really hard for me to focus. My mind kept bouncing around to different ideas, and either that or I would fall asleep because I was very sleep deprived during that first attempt at trying to develop a mindfulness practice. So I went from as soon as I got myself relaxed, I would immediately fall asleep. So I've gotten better with my mindfulness practice, and it has taken time and it's taken a lot of work, but the benefits far outweigh the work that it takes. So for me, I meditate 5 to 10 minutes in the day, either at morning or at night. Sometimes I like to do it in the morning because at night, if I'm too tired, then I'll end up falling into a deep state of relaxation and end up falling asleep instead of actually practicing my practice. So, which is good, but not great when you're trying to improve your meditation practice. So again, we're going to practice meditation can be a good practice for you to recognize the good throughout your life. And just being open to this is just a starting point. We are going to now look at the positivity ratio test, and this is something that you'll be completing 3 times throughout the week. So it takes about 2 minutes, and you're going to complete this 3 times, as I said, throughout the week. And You'll go through, answer these questions that are on the screen, and then calculate and write that down. So that is something else. And then I would also challenge you to complete one set of guided meditation. So thinking about what could be helpful for you. Maybe it's a loving kindness meditation. Maybe it's a gratitude meditation. Maybe it's a morning energizing meditation. But just try to experience that and see what that experience is like for you. This is the conclusion of the Positive Emotions Session 2 for the Positive Psychology Workshop and Unit. I look forward to your completion of these activities, and any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you for your time this week.